how do you want to be remembered?
How do I want to be remembered? I wanted to go to college, and at that time there was not many from the community where I grew up that went to college. I knew I was going to go. I didn't know how. The summer before I went, my daddy, like he had, was in the hospital, like to die. The money that my parents had saved to send me to school, it went for hospital bills. How was I going to school? I didn't know, but I said, I'm going. I had a great uncle, my grandmother's brother, lived in Oregon, and he was a college professor out there. He wrote to me several times, wanted me to come live with him, and I could attend the college right near where he lived. I could take all the classes I wanted to, and it wouldn't cost me a penny. But Michael, I'd hardly ever been out of Davie County. There was no way I had the nerve to get on a bus or on a train and ride all the way across the country. So I turned him down on it. And just a few days before it was time to go to Appalachian, I got a letter from him, and he had sent me $300. That was enough to pay my tuition the first year. Doesn't sound possible, does it? But if I had $100, I could register for the quarter. And that's how I went. Now, I had been valedictorian of my high school class, and I never made anything but an A. But when I got all registered for my classes, one that I was taking, I didn't even know the word, what it meant, and it was calculus. What in the world is that? The teacher that I got was Dr. Wright. He had been a professor there for many years, but had been retired probably 10 or 15 years. When he came to class, he would come in the door singing. He had a beautiful voice. He went to the board and he wrote calculus problems on the board till he got the board full. Then he walked out of the class singing some more songs. We'd have a test. Everybody looked at each other. What are we supposed to do? At the end of the first 6 weeks, we got a grade. I made a C on that calculus thing. I'd never had a C in my life, and I didn't like it. I thought my parents wouldn't let me stay up there. I'd get kicked out. They would disown me. Oh, I had an awful time there for a while. But let me tell you, by the time the year was over and I got a C minus, I said, thank you, Lord. After that, it got easier. Majored in science and took my concentration in chemistry. You know, it usually takes 4 years. Well, I had doubled them enough. I got through in 3.5. At Christmas, I left Appalachian. They had a vacancy at Knoxville High School, out there where the Brock Center is. So I went in the middle of the year and taught all 5 classes. We argue now about preparation for one class. I had it for 5. Of course, the kids had used to having a seasoned teacher, and there I was, a greenhorn, and they really enjoyed that. The first day that I taught, they didn't give me a grade book, they didn't give me a textbook, I had nothing. So here, all I could do was pass around a sheet of paper and let them sign their name. Well, I got to noticing that in every class, there was the same boy, but a different name. Come to find out, he was a college student at home on break and came down to check the new teacher out. Now, the visitors have to report to the office. They can't just go to class, and that's a good thing. I was not married then, and that's all I did, just my preparations and getting ready for the next day. Going back to my high school times, when we went into the first grade, there was this little boy that was in the first grade too. All through school, very good friends. No romance, just friendship. I had not seen him, heard from him, or anything for 2 years. And one Sunday night, my parents had been down to my grandparents' house, and she sent me a great big bouquet of flowers. Well, I went from back of the house up to the front to get a vase. And when I opened the door and went through there, he was there fixing to knock. He hadn't knocked yet. Well, that was not any surprise because we'd been friends and he'd been to my house lots of times for things. So I invited him in. Well, we sat there and we talked and we talked, and I kept wondering, what'd you come for? I was expecting him to tell me that he wanted some help on something or invite me to go to somewhere, but he didn't. When time came to go home, he asked me if he could come back the next Sunday night. I said, well, yes. I knew he was kind of shy, and I thought, well, maybe couldn't he get his nerve up? Now, graduation used to be a big thing. Everybody in the community went to graduation. So graduation was the next Friday night. He asked me if I'd like to go to graduation. I said, sure. And it was not until the third episode of going out for some other reason that it sunk into me that he was interested in something besides graduation. We saw each other once a week, all summer. And then I went back to Appalachian. So remember, you don't have much gas. You don't have good tires. But he would come to Boone, I think I'm safe in saying once a quarter, to see me. We had, of course, got serious and were discussing marriage and everything. But I wanted a pretty wedding. And I said, I got to work a year to get my pretty wedding. He agreed to that. In the meantime, they had started building this house. Of course, we didn't have any money. When they got the roof up and the siding on, we moved in. The subfloor was what we had to live on. The walls, nothing was finished, nothing was painted. There wasn't even a doorstep. There's been times, Michael, I remember one time when Daddy and I, between us, we had $2. $2. You don't know what that's like. The first year that I taught, I made $125 a month. And we thought we had plenty of money. He was making $150. So we had $275. I remember getting one check. It went to buy furnace to go in the basement. Every time either one of us would get a check, there was something about this house that was needed to buy something that you had to have. That's the way we got a house. When we finally finished it, we didn't owe anybody a penny. If we could get a bucket of paint, we painted the room. If we got enough money to pay for one room of floor, we put a floor down. But, Michael, you don't care. As long as you're together, as long as you love each other, it doesn't matter what you've got. See, I could sweep the floor and the dirt went down in the basement. That's pretty easy housekeeping. We didn't have anything, but we had all we needed. And we still have all we need. We had a wonderful time together. We were good friends all those years before love came. But when it came with a bang. Our wedding, I had always gone to Bear Creek Church. It was just a little one-room frame church. But that's where I had gone all my life. And they were in the process of adding some wings on the church, making it big enough to have more seats. They'd taken the carpet up. It was a mess. Everybody said, you can't get married there. I said, watch me. When they got the carpet up, they saw the floor was rough just rough, just sawed lumber, and I had a train on my dress. Well, about the time I would start down the aisle, that train was going to hook on them splinters, and I might walk out of my dress. Well, we couldn't have that. And so my daddy went to the farm supply place and bought a roll of tobacco canvas, stripped it down the aisle, and that's what I walked on. Even though it was a makeshift wedding, it was pretty. And everybody said, well, she did it. Because it was beautiful to look at. Well, we got married in June. And then in November, a year and a half after that, that's when Helen arrived. Well, now what do I do with this little baby? I'd never had my hands on a little baby before. And then our son came along, and Nancy and your daddy in quick succession. And then almost 5 years later, Teresa and Letha came. In the meantime, Helen was good friends with this girl whose daddy was the principal of the high school. But one morning I was doing the dishes, and the phone rang, and it was Mary Kaiser, the secretary at the school. She said, Madam, Mr. Ward wants to talk to you. And he took the phone, and he said, Madam, it's time you got down here and signed this contract. I said, what contract? He said, you're going to teach for me? Well, Michael, I had been talking baby talk for 20 years. I thought I could carry on an adult conversation. I certainly had been teaching them biology and chemistry and calculus. I honestly didn't know whether I could do it. See, remember, it was still wartime, and teachers hard to find, especially one with a math and science major. I said, now, if I take it, what if I get tired of it and decide I can't do it? I said, would you let me quit? He said, well, if you will stay until we find a replacement, yes, you can quit. So that was the contract between us. It was an up and down ride. It was not all bump free by any means, but I survived till school was out. I figured that'd be the end of it. Instead of that, they brought me a contract for the next year. I stayed with it 27 years after that. I had 3 years credit from when I had taught before we got married. So I got my 30 years, but it took me 50 years to do it. I don't know what happened during those 50 years, but John and I both got old. We looked it, we felt it. We still, both of us worked, but it's a big adjustment from doing it all to doing just a little bit. We looked at each other and thought, what do we do now? And he got to wanting to travel some. So for the next 5 or 6 years, every summer we would go somewhere. Several years down the line, he had had a flat tire on the lawnmower, had got the tire fixed, so he was going to put it on the lawnmower and mow the yard. And the screwdriver and little tools that he made was up over the refrigerator. And he got a stool, kitchen stool, and climbed up just enough to be able to reach those tools. And I don't know what happened. No, but we'll never know for sure. But in coming down off that stool, he slipped and fell. And I can still hear his head hit that hard floor. Well, he insisted on getting up by himself. And he did it by himself and came out here and sat down. But the mailman had come. I got the mail and gave that to him. And about that time, the telephone rang. And it was one of the neighbors. Now, this neighbor that lives real close to us, her son owns some property that you can see out these windows, those hills back there. And we knew that he was in the hospital dying with cancer, actually dying. And this neighbor knew that Ruby was there by herself. And she asked me, she'd called to say, Madam, she couldn't drive. She said, would you go sit with Ruby a while? Well, I didn't want to go because I'd always heard that if somebody got hit in the head, you needed to watch them carefully. But Granddaddy asked me who it was and what was going on. I told him. He said, well, honey, you've got to go. And I said, no, I don't think I need to leave you. You've got to go. She needs you. So I said, I'll run a minute. Well, I went out there and was there probably 30 minutes, and somebody else came in. So when they came in, I came straight home. Well, when I drove in the garage, we had a little dog, and I had left it in here with him. Well, that little dog was in the garage just about to go crazy because he'd never been shut up out there. And he came running in, and when I came in the door, Granddaddy was sitting in the floor, leaned back against the chair rail, and he was unconscious. Well, I called 911. Little dog just a charging hard as he could go. And so they didn't take but a few minutes to get here. Well, they asked me, where do you want to take him? I said, for South. And the attendant said, Miss Sparks, he really needs to go to the trauma center at Baptist. I said, we'll take him. Well, he had always told me and made me promise, don't you ever let him hook me up to life support. And I promised I wouldn't. Nancy came by about that time, and she stopped, and we took off to Baptist. We weren't familiar with it and didn't know where we were supposed to go. And by the time we found him, they had already had him hooked up to life support. I said, oh my goodness, what now? And then they took him and did an MRI to see what was going on. And the stem of his brain back here, in that fall, it had come loose. And blood was accumulating in his head. And they told me that they could operate and drain that out, but he would never, ever come back to conscious life and be able to be a normal person. Well, I knew he wouldn't want that. And they told us that they had a room upstairs they could put him in, and your whole family can stay with him if they want to. And so that's what I did. But it was just as hard to tell him to unhook him as it was to say. And he lived, and that happened about 4 o'clock in the evening. He lived that night and died through the night the next night. Then we got through that. Now what do I do? What do I do? Well, the best I could. I still had to mow the yard. I still had to clean the house. And I made myself get busy there for a while. And until within the last year, I did whatever I wanted to do. But then the bottom fell out, and I've had to limit what I do. But I still have fun. I'm still happy. I still love you and all 15 of our grandchildren and 34 little greats. You folks, you 15, I've been so proud of you. You have all done well. You have stayed out of trouble. You have had good grades. So for the next year, you can't break that rule. You've got to keep up with it. I think sometimes, what's my life been like? Has it been worth anything at all to the Lord, to other people, to my family, my neighbors? And sometimes I feel like I come up empty. And that's not a very good feeling. So while you're young, while you've got your health, take advantage of every opportunity that you have. It may not come but once. So grab it and run with it. That little word love is a powerful word, and you can't do enough of it. That's how I want to be remembered. Not that I have done anything people admire. That's not matter a bit. I enjoyed living. We certainly had the most wonderful marriage this side of heaven, and I wouldn't take the world for that. I loved our children. I still do. I mean, those babies grow up, but so does the love you have for them. And I hope they'll remember that I loved them. I might have spanked them, but I don't think they're still mad at me for it. I have had a wonderful life. If I die tonight, I have no regrets. I wouldn't change a thing, but just more of it.
All right. Oh, Grandmommy, I'm going to ask you one final thing.
Okay.
Would you mind just saying your full name for me, please?
Okay. My name is Helen Madeline Smoot Sparks. And it's been that way now for 73 years. And I'm so proud of it. And I wouldn't change it for the world. I'm just glad that Granddaddy decided he wanted me.
Thank you, Grandmommy.
You're welcome, sweetie.
He was born in the summer of his 27th year, coming home to a place he'd never been before. He left yesterday behind him. You might say he was born again. You might say he found the key for every door. When he first came to the mountains, his life was far away, on the road, hanging by a song. But the string's already broken, and he doesn't really care. It keeps changing fast, and it don't last for long. But the Colorado Rocky Mountain High, I've seen it rain and fire in the sky. The shadow from the starlight is softer than a lullaby. Rocky Mountain High, Colorado Rocky Mountain High. I've seen it rain and fire in the sky. Friends around the campfire and everybody's high. Rocky Mountain High, Colorado. Rocky Mountain High, Rocky Mountain High, Rocky Mountain High, Rocky Mountain High, Rocky Mountain High.
Still live in Charlotte.
Well, in the last 5 years, there's not been any drastic change. We have 6 children. We have 9 grandchildren. They range in age from 7 to 14, I think it is, and I'm still teaching at David High School. John sold his cows last year, and so we feel like we've been on vacation ever since. We don't have to go to bed at 8 o'clock and get up at 3:30. Of course, I did before. We're enjoying his retirement because if we want to do something, we do, and we don't have to hurry home.
My brother, where do you intend to go tonight? I heard that you missed your connecting flight to the Blue Ridge Mountain over near Tennessee. You're ever welcome with me anytime you like. Let's drive to the countryside, leave behind some green-eyed look-alike.